All right, Lance, you put up a piece at auburndaily.com yesterday about the 3 trap games to watch. Kind of take
Yeah.
us through that, if you will.
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning of the schedule. So I've got 3 different games here. 2 of them are Power 5 opponents. One of them's a group of 5 school. We'll get to that later because it is later in the schedule. But let's start here with Missouri. It's September 23rd, 4th game of the season. In my opinion, I think this is the most reasonable contest to pin as a trap game. I think it's got the most potential because if you're looking on the surface, when you look at all these preseason magazines and predictions and what Vegas is saying, Auburn's not going to be favored in a lot of games. Quite
Right.
frankly, a lot of people don't think Auburn's going to a bowl. So you have to kind of look at some of the surefire wins, maybe in conference play, surefire wins in non-conference play, and say, okay, which one of these could be iffy? I think Missouri is one of those games where if Auburn's going to go 5-7, most people, including fans, would just assume, oh, that's a game Auburn should catch a dub in, right? They should be able to go in at home and beat Missouri, a team that they're arguably, I would say, significantly more talented than. But you
Yeah.
start to really dig into it. I mean, both these teams are coming off 6 and 7 seasons. Both of them have turmoil at the quarterback position. And what Missouri has done is gone out and gotten Jayden Daniels, transfer from Arizona State. 35-13 touchdown interception ratio. Was like 10 picks to 10 INTs last year at Arizona State, but he's got promise as a quarterback, right? And I think Missouri, with the loss of Tyler Beatty, their bell cow running back, they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more. They've got a couple of really talented receivers. Mookie Cooper, transfer from Ohio State. Luther Burden, 5-star receiver in their recruiting cycle this year. If they have to throw the ball a little bit more, and this is just speculation. This is not definitive. If they have to throw the ball a little bit more, what does Auburn's secondary look like if they can't generate a consistent pass rush? Got to
Okay.
see it against Penn State, got to see it against Mississippi State, right? That's just my concern, is that maybe Auburn has a little bit of scheme issue early on in the year, and they're still working the kinks out. They've just played Penn State. They're coming off of a tough game. What does Auburn's defense look like? Can they get Missouri off the field on 3rd down whenever they need to? Or will this efficient passing game that Missouri could potentially have, again, nothing's definitive, could
Right.
potentially have, does it give Auburn problems? Also, what does Auburn's quarterback position look like 4 weeks into the season? Maybe Auburn struggles against Penn State and they've got to rework things, right? So this is just a potential trap game. I'm not saying that it's definitive, but it's a possibility on their schedule. Zach, what do you think about that?
I think it's interesting. I mean, your arguments make sense. The fact that it's in Jordan-Hare Stadium makes it less trap gamey to me. When I think trap game, and there's no perfect definition of a trap game, but just the first thing that comes to mind is when a team is favored by 14 points going on the road. That's kind of what I think a trap game. And I think Auburn will be favored against Missouri, and obviously it's at home. So it would be bad. Like, people will call for Brian Harsin's job if Auburn loses that game.
Right. And my thing is, like, if you look at Auburn's schedule, there's not going to be a lot of road games that Auburn's favored in this season. I mean, they have to go on the road to Mississippi State and Ole Miss. They've got to go on the road to Alabama, to Georgia. There's just not a lot of opportunity for Auburn to
Right.
go into a road environment and say, we can take control of this game and win it fairly easily. So for me, when doing this, I had to look at some of the home games, and Missouri
Fair
was the
enough.
first one. The second one here was
Yep.
Arkansas. This is October 28th. And some
Right.
people may hear that and immediately think about, well, Arkansas went 9-4 last season. They were a top 25 team. They're going to be a preseason top 25 team this year. And you're right. I think they're going to be a good team. But here's the thing. Arkansas only brings back 9 combined starters, 6 on offense, 3 on defense. What does that look like under Sam Pittman, who is still trying to get the program on its feet in terms of recruiting? Curious to see what that looks like. Also, Arkansas is really struggling at receiver, so it may take them some time to really pan some of those guys out. And you look at their schedule, incredibly difficult. In the first half of the schedule, they play Cincinnati, South Carolina, A&M, and Alabama. And then before they play Auburn, they go on the road to Mississippi State and BYU, which is so weird that they're playing BYU right in the middle of the season, but it's
Yeah.
whatever. But the point being, there's a realistic chance Arkansas could be somewhere between 4-3 and 2-5 by the time they play Auburn, depending on how bad things get. And so what I'm saying is, while Arkansas may have a bad record, or they may be under 500, or they may be struggling, they're still a really talented football team. And it could catch Auburn by surprise, considering that this game is in between road trips to Mississippi State and Ole Miss, right? They may be looking ahead if Ole Miss is a really good team, which I don't think is a characteristic of a Brian Harsin team. But if we're just talking about potential trap games here, I think it's fair to assume that that's a possibility. But this Arkansas team, I think, is going to be better than what their record indicates. I don't believe the saying that you are what your record says you are. I think it's 9-4 for Arkansas last season. Could have probably been 11-1, 12-0 in the Pac-12, right? 11-1 in the Big 12, right? So I just think that
I think
this is
they
going to
overachieved a
be.
little bit last year too. Like
They
even in the
did.
SEC, like were they 9-4 good, or were they like? I mean, just watching them, especially when Auburn played them, like probably more of like a 7-5 team. If we're just gonna be honest.
Some things did bounce their way. I'll say that, and I think that's even more reason
That
to believe
happens.
that.
There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Right. I think that there's even more reason to believe that they could take a slide. Like ESPN's FPI, which is always on something, whatever it is, I want to have some of it. But they project ESPN's FPI, or excuse me, ESPN thinks that Arkansas will go 6-6 or 7-5 this season. It's like 6.5, 5.5. So it could be one of those games where it's just like, okay, Auburn is somehow like what, 7-2, 7-3, 6-3, something like that, and they're heading into this game expected to win it. They're favored by 8.5 points, and all of a sudden, on an 11 a.m. game on the SEC network, Arkansas's offense explodes, and Auburn doesn't have enough firepower to catch back up. It's like this game gives me 2021 Mississippi State vibes. I don't know why, it just does.
I get it. I get it. Yeah, I mean, I think Auburn beats Arkansas this year, and I think they beat Missouri. So I think you putting them as trap games makes sense. What's your third one?
And I'll say this: I don't think that the way you go about trying to peg trap games, at least in my opinion, is looking at the games that Auburn should win, right? And even
Yeah.
some of the games at home, that Mississippi State game has scarred me permanently. So I will forever be looking at the games at home and just be like, okay, which team has a really good passing attack? Because I'm really, really scared about that. And this final team, actually, speaking of passing attack, had a really, really good one last year. It was actually the best in the country. Western Kentucky. Now, the Hilltoppers don't bring back a ton of production on the offensive side of the ball. They lost their really talented quarterback. They lost a couple of their receivers, but they've still got a lot of talent on roster. And their unit last season averaged 44.2 points per game. That was second nationally. Their passing attack, first in the country, averaged 443 passing yards per game. They're still going to be relatively lethal. Okay. And this goes back to what I was saying about Missouri. Is Auburn struggled against Mississippi State's air raid last season, right? What happens when this defense faces an efficient passing attack, right? That's just my concern. And you may say, well, Auburn's defense could have that figured out by the end of the season. Yeah, well, they didn't against Mississippi State last year. And so the concern there, I think, is legitimate. Now, should Auburn win this game by 40? Probably. But if things fall off the rails for Auburn this season, right? And they are definitely out of bowl contention and things have just kind of gone wrong, does Auburn get up for a game against Western Kentucky in between games against Texas A&M and Alabama? Right.
No.
I just
in that world, no, that doesn't happen. Yeah.
And so I think that there is concern. There would be legitimate concern in that scenario. And I think that's why it's a potential trap game.
Interesting. That's good. It's good to think about. And I think you lay out good points. And I'm with you. That Mississippi State game from last year is just like, it was, I asked several folks that have come on over the last few weeks, what, like if you had to pick 3 games that Auburn would win in SEC, like which 3 are you most comfortable with? And Justin Ferguson said Mississippi State was one of his. And I'm like, I just can't get there. I just can't get there based on what happened last year. So I'm right there with you.
And it's in Starkganistan.
That's right. That's right. Yep. That makes some people mad when you say it, but I hate that place. I hate it.